This video is a collection of creative synthesis tricks that you can use to help add character to your synth keys. I've tried to keep these tips as universal as possible, so no matter what synths you typically use, you should be able to apply them. Most of the sounds you're going to be hearing in this video are from my latest preset pack for Serum called LUCID. Link is in the description, but more about that later. Before we get to the more advanced techniques in the video, let's start with some important fundamentals. Bear with me on this one. When it comes to waveform selection for synth keys, the best advice I can give you is to keep it simple. As a rule of thumb, the more complex the waveform, the more you limit your options down the line. Honestly, most of the time when I design presets, I usually just start with a saw wave. It's only once I've got the core of the patch down that I really start to experiment with different waveforms. If I do want to add a bit of complexity, it can be surprising how introducing just one other basic waveform can achieve this, even when set to a lower amplitude. We can actually use Serum to visually demonstrate this by resampling the output of two basic waveforms to oscillator A. In most wavetable synths, you can also create interesting harmonics by simply warping the waveform. If you want to grab a collection of wavetables, I highly recommend checking out my free wavetable collection, link below. Finally, for keys, I generally prefer to keep the unison amount quite low, mainly to avoid ending up with something too pad-like, but I do sometimes break this rule if I'm going for a bigger sound. Okay, so let's get to the fun stuff. The first thing I want to cover is some creative ways you can add width to your keys without relying too much on unison. Firstly, let's say your patch is only making use of one oscillator. We can simply duplicate this, offsetting the fine tune and panning one left and one right. This does, however, result in a unison type effect, so if you're after a more traditional key sound, some other tricks include using an LFO to modulate the pan. When set to a high rate, this gives the illusion of width. It's also worth seeing what other less obvious options you have in the modulation matrix. In Serum, for example, I found this really useful modulation source called Note on Random, which, when assigned to the pan of an oscillator, will randomly pan each individual note across the stereo field. One of the defining characteristics of any key sound is the Inharmonics. There's two different ways I like to use noise for keys. Firstly, to sometimes reinforce the transient or attack of the sound with a plucky envelope. Or alternatively, just to add some overall texture. Finally, if your synth has FM capabilities, you can also create interesting textures this way. When a key in real life is hit, there's more noise at the start of the sound. We can emulate this with a short decaying envelope, modulating the FM amount. Adjusting the pitch of the oscillator can dramatically alter the results. In just a moment, I'm going to share with you some of my favorite key design tricks, but I'll briefly mention I just put out a new preset pack called LUCID, a collection of keys and pads that are versatile and, in my opinion, full of character. Polyphonic sounds have become somewhat of a speciality of mine over the years, and so I thought, why not create a pack dedicated to them? It's also the first pack to make use of some new wavetables I made recently, and can be really great for reverse engineering and getting inspiration for your own patches. Thanks so so much if you do decide to check it out. It really is what makes these videos possible. Okay, so let's get to what you're probably waiting for, which is some creative modulation ideas. Firstly, I want to quickly show you the 3 different ways I like to use pitch modulation, starting with vibrato, which can be achieved by using a fast LFO to modulate the pitch of an oscillator. If we instead lower this LFO rate, we get the second type of effect I like to use, which is known as pitch drift. For both vibrato and pitch drift, one trick I really want to highlight is to contrast one oscillator with a stable pitch to another that's more extreme. The stable oscillator acts as kind of an anchor point, allowing you to push the other quite far. For a more random and tape-style pitch drift, you can also reduce the LFO rate even further and draw in your own shape. If you're a Serum user, you can also use Serum's chaos oscillators to achieve a similar thing. Finally, we have a pitch bend modulation. Most commonly, I like to use an envelope to modulate the master tune of the synth by an octave. If your synth has more customizable envelopes like Serum's LFOs, you can be as creative with this as you like. Let's listen to one of my personal favourite patches from LUCID called Aqua. This patch makes use of a lot of the techniques we've already covered, but also makes great use of one of my absolute favourite sound design tools, Keytracking. If you're not aware, this is a modulation source that outputs higher values the further up the keyboard you play, used commonly, for example, to open up a filter as you play up the keyboard. There's so many other applications for this, however, one I really want to highlight is using key tracking on modulation you've already set up. For example, the patch Aqua has vibrato. If in the mod matrix we use key tracking to modulate the rate of the LFO responsible for this, we get dynamic vibrato modulation up and down the keyboard. Also worth mentioning is that the same concept can be applied to velocity modulation. Now, to be honest, when it comes to effects for key sounds, I generally like to keep things quite simple. There's the usual suspects like reverb and delay, but without a doubt, the effect I use most is chorus. As with any polyphonic sound, distortion can be hard to implement. Generally, something like tape saturation can add some nice harmonics. Or downsample distortion, which can add some nice digital highs without coloring the sound. Outside of this, feel free to experiment. Again, I'd love for you to check out LUCID for Serum. Your support on these packs is really why I'm able to keep making videos. If you're looking for some creative ideas for layering with your synth keys, I highly recommend watching my last video. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.